This is a nose-to-nose audio production. The Magic of Everyday Life by Maria Zeppes, translated by Amy Modley. Translator's Note: I have been empowered by the dear author of this work to say a few words about the nature of translating Hungarian into English. It is important to note that the two languages are vastly different in syntax, grammar, and most of all, phrasing, not least of all, rhythm and cadence, which also convey meaning. Hungarian is a musical, richly layered, textural language that can almost be conducted with diminuendos and crescendos, syncopation, and a lot of rhythm, as witnessed the great Hungarian musical conductors and performers in the world. Hungarian has been called one of the sacred languages, along with Sanskrit, Hebrew, and a few others. Consequently, it is not dissimilar from the subject of this book, which, dear reader, you have engaged. By that is be that as it may, it is of consequence to note that a Hungarian sentence does not necessarily require a verb in order to convey full meaning, especially so of the verb to be. There is no grammatical gender differentiation. Gender is understood in context and confirmed by separate words that clarify, for example, hierarchical family relationships. Otherwise, gender is linguistically impersonal. I had considered balancing the convention in the English language of using the masculine form to include women by using the feminine exclusively. However, I abandoned this approach in favor of the plural form because essentially we're talking about all of us. If we say that concepts are given, form through words, shaped by words, and that words empower the magic of everyday life, must surely then include translating concepts into words, indeed, deeds. If we say that concepts are given form through words, shaped by words, and that words empower, the magic of everyday life must surely then include translating concepts into words, indeed, deeds. Can you possibly forget, in the strength or weakness of your spiritual immune system, your various sicknesses? Can you possibly forget that in this? Can you Can you possibly forget that in the strength or weakness of your spiritual immune system, your various sicknesses, health, development of your destiny, succeed, or failure are rooted? Can you possibly forget that in the strength or weakness of your immune system, your various sicknesses, health, development of your destiny, success, or failure are rooted? This is a nose to nose audio production. The Magic of Everyday Life by Maria Zeppes. Introduction by Maria Zeppes. I wrote this study, into whose unusual dimensions you are about to enter, several years ago. Only my closest friends were permitted to read it then, in those times of adverse circumstances surrounding certain themes such as psychology and progressive intellectual thought that were shrouded in secrecy. Those whom it did reach were able to master serious crisis through my helpful methods without conflict, creating furthermore an understanding relationship with themselves and the world. They found these methods useful in the midst of struggles with seemingly irresolute problems. The book became a sort of quote unquote bedtime companion. The Magic of Everyday Life offers solutions for mastery over discontent, how to step aside from painful conflict, how we can become successful, engaging, popular, and creative members of society. Over the years, my readers have prepared for language I use in literary discipline of this kind. Those, however, who have not encountered concepts such as these before may come upon certain difficulties stemming from philosophical references. I will try, therefore, to make my directives understandable for each seeker because my sole objective is to help. I will begin first of all with a precise definition of the generally misunderstood, maligned, and superstitiously condemned concept of magic. Magic in reality means power, the magic power of the imagination manifesting in form. And if magic power in itself feels somewhat foreign to you, I refer you to the recognition by modern medical science that acknowledges most illnesses, including organic problems, to be psychosomatic in origin, beginning for the most part with the certain ideas about or fear of a supposed illness. As for example, phobias about cancer, choking, acrophobia, the obviously stress related disease such as goiter, diabetes, colitis, certain heart problems, stomach ulcers, blood pressure fluctuation, allergy of, allergies of untraceable origin. I could go on endlessly. More than likely, some disease manifests as a result of the defense of the conscious and quote unquote escape into illness from responsibility, abandonment, disappointment, and other psychological hurts. A research process burgeons from the quote unquote creative imagination because imagination is a great magician. In its lack of self awareness, it is a black magician. The laser thrust of our feelings and thoughts irritate an organ, our nervous system, metabolism, heart, skin, glands until one of them sends the signal, only as a symptom at first, but in the end actually obeying the dangerous autosuggestion. Our organs, captive under the barrage of our fears, produce an actual syndrome, a veritable masterwork of illness that affects our entire physical body. Through the vehicle of this book, not only as an author but also as a psychologist and character analyst, I have tried to delve into the inner reaches of the invisible root to the visible, to the cause of the effects, with success based on my experience and my statistics. The object of my method is to produce the vaccine, the antidote, from injuries that have coagulated into self tormenting phantoms, healing images to replace disease causing ones. According to Hippocrates, where you find the poison, you also find the cure. The intention the intention to not infect ourselves with fear. Fear of the future, the present, our fellow human beings, inability to hold bravely to our principles, or inappropriate behavior that may cause injury, I think is a worthwhile human effort, especially in the tension filled world we live in today. As is the fact, I am not merely offering words to the reader, but tried and tested quote unquote medicine that I have taken myself. I am not one, of course, who discovers the correlation. I am not the one, of course, who discovered the correlation between destructive, moreover deadly imagination and physical disease, or self determined restrictive processes and practices. As early as the First World War, Professor Carl Ludwig Schlegel worked with healing quote unquote hysterics and the surprising manifestations they created from their imagination. Dr. Schlegel held that so called hysteria was a form of creative genius that functioned without the control or direction of conscious thought. He observed countless proof of this phenomenon, from bleeding stigmata to false pregnancies, through to the case of the man condemned to die. This person was seated in a bathtub filled with water, his hands tied behind his back. His wrists were scratched his wrists were scratched superficially, and the water, unbeknownst to him, was gradually colored a deep red. The quote unquote patient died after a while in a tub full of water because he imagined he was bleeding to death. Self destructive ideas operate in almost everyone without our calling them by name. Lack of self confidence, fear of old age or death that crowd at the threshold of every mortal consciousness are all destructive ulcers to the spirit. This is a reality that unfortunately cannot be denied. It can be seen and grasped innumerable it can be seen and grasped in innumerable it can be seen and grasped in innumerable manifestations, although people deflect it from themselves, try not to talk about it, or even delude themselves. Their condition, meanwhile, becomes even more worrisome. There are very few physicians who can actually counteract the phenomenon, who delve deeply into the hidden fulcrum of the disease instead of attempting to free the patient of an entirely mystifying disease complex with the help of variously administered chemicals that often summon dangerous side effects or merely temporarily ameliorate symptoms, which of course reappear again and again because methods that treat only physical symptoms are in the main ineffective. It is true, however, that this fact was known thousands of years ago by such wise men as Hippocrates, Plato, and Paracelsus, and in the ancient wisdom even before them in Egyptian philosophy, and by the wise men of antiquity in the Middle Ages, that illness must be called by its proper name. Fear is fundamentally always a fear of death. Light disperses darkness. Terror is an internal projection mechanism functioning within us. The monsters we see are in fact our own creation. The body is a medium of the spirit, a transmitting instrument for the symptom of the spirit's symbolic language. Professor Schleich illumined wonderfully the role of the psyche and the physical medium in the working of the spirit. Their harmony represents balance in our lives. Their opposites leads to the disintegration of our inner life, catastrophe. No matter how confidently a genius intellect may soar into the future or be most appealingly cultured, it's all brass. If the sim- No matter how confidently a genius intellect may soar into the future or be most appealingly cultured, it's all brass if the sympathetic nervous system provided. No matter how confidently a genius intellect may soar into the future, are most appealingly cultured. No matter how confidently a genius intellect may soar into the future or be most appealingly cultured, it's all brass if the sympathetic nervous system provides the person no security. Kabbalistic traditions expresses it in this way. Inner harmony requires a person to think with the heart as well as to feel with the brain. I quote this sentence in part from the work done by Nandor Varkonyi entitled Lost Paradise, but I added the closing phrase from the game rules of the ancient tarot cards. Not many people suspect the lightning flash genius of the seemingly indecipherable conceptual switch. Let us consider, however, the example that a polyhistorian with a tremendous encyclopedic knowledge can also be morally uninhibited with a merciless egoist. Wait. Let us consider, however, that the example that a polyhistorian with tremendous encyclopedic knowledge can also be morally uninhibited and a merciless egoist because he is morally immature, whereas a simple person living in close alignment with nature can bring forth pure eternal wisdom. Bearing in mind the foregoing passages, I am comfortable in daring to write down the essence of what I have to say supported by modern natural science. We are the patients of our own fears, thoughts, and bad imaginings. Psychologically, as a result, we are victims of our own quote unquote black magic. Our neuroses begins not in our bodies but in our minds, and we can only attempt to ameliorate the disease causing vortices that cause injury to our physical body if we delve down into the deeper hidden roots. However, it always takes two to heal. One, an observer who, beyond the visible reflexes, penetrates the invisible cause and tries to help in every instance according to the unique character of each patient using individual methods. And the patient, who truly wants to heal, who does not insist on holding on to the alibi of their self made health, who accepts the true names of the psychic elixirs, the medicines extracted from their own disease. Proof of this process can be demonstrated through the example of two people suffering from the same illness. One who believes in the doctor or psychologist, knows, fights and recovers from their troubles and heals completely. The other gives up, cannot or will not grasp the lifeline cast at them, and is destroyed by the same disease. No one can live in another's place. We cannot surgically remove someone else's abscess from their own body. The physician can write the best prescriptions and prescribe tried and true treatments with no avail if the patient does not make use of them. Illnesses of the soul have countless hidden causes and pseudonyms. Most often as Most often as compensatory activity, they manifest frightful symptoms which lead to organic disturbances and ultimately death. Among the hidden cause, we frequently find hunger for love, desire for attention, revenge, blackmail, retaliation for injuries suffered, escape from obligations, infantile withdrawal into the alarm from personal responsibility, and many others. Also belonging to the difficult realm of deep psychology is the case of someone who attempts suicide out of rage impregnated by jealousy in order to punish others for their loneliness, hoping that rescue arrives in time. In the end, however, the person miscalculates and dies as a result of a public display of blackmail. In the manner so described, if as unconscious black magicians we can constantly infect, poison, and destroy ourselves with horrors, traumas, phobias, exalted imaginings, and blinding passions, why couldn't we also be white magicians and consciously banish the black apparitions from our mind, the fears that turn into terror, the ferocious power of damaging impulses, and replace them with rays, magic incantations of self confidence, hope, and recognition? We have no need for this toxic sludge. We must change our unhealthy behavior. The magic of everyday life is modern behavioral science. So far, no one has regretted trying the recommended methodology. Only a person who rises above themselves can step out of the world's moral, economic, and ecological cataclysm and also from the shackles of their own karma and destiny. This is a nose to nose audio production. The Magic of Everyday Life by Maria Zeppes. Translated by Amy Modley. Chapter 1: The Psychology of Shaping One's Fate. Human existence is played out between the 2 points of past and future. We are on the path from the mysterious past into the unknown future. Few know that as only exceptional beings or are conscious few know that as only exceptional beings or are conscious of from where we came and whither we are going. Humankind generally struggles to actualize mysterious urges wedged between the two turnstiles of birth and death, feeling that all hope, ambition, and love's desires must be packed into this short interval. In order to reach this nebulous goal, which we give the cover name of happiness, we believe we only have this momentary flash of existence at our disposal. This conduct is in the main improper, since it never does bring us closer to the pined for goal. Rather, it obscures a transcendent seed rooted in the soul's unconscious memory, the sense of importance of the incarnation presently in progress. Shaping fate, acquiring control over fate, is a constant battle with determinism. That is, it is a battle of the intellect with matter and demons. Matter weighs us down, demons wreak havoc within us. Determinism takes effect on our fate only to the extent and the manner to which our inner conduct evokes it and our character acquiesces before it. Fate, in the process of unfolding, is not tempered in the past nor in the future, but in the present. It is at this juncture that various determining processes take place. It is in the present moment that results from the past are processed and future is created. Therefore, it is always at all times the present moment that is life. Our only chance to liberate ourselves exists in the present reality, recognizing it, taking action, struggling to attain. The existential form in which we live is the most immediate task that awaits our solution. We can never be masters of our fate without conquering fear. Without sublimation of our overburdened powers, we cannot soar to the more etheric planes where the conditions of life are much less painful. Without overcoming our blindness, we cannot know the secrets of existence. The magic of everyday life is about accessing tools to help those interested in unraveling the torturous, seemingly unlovable minute complications with which we chain ourselves to the pettiness, failures, and irritations of daily existence. With an imagination that casts its glance to the high heavens, these bonds may seem like the chains of the Lilliputians used to tie Gulliver to the ground. When he tried to pull on them, he discovered that they cut into his flesh and that he was incapable of freeing himself from their constraint, and they almost paralyzed him. If we can untie them successfully, we gain momentum over the precipice and the complications of fate, becoming a master where until now we were merely a confined prisoner. We must emphasize that we are not, even for a moment, talking of mere conceptual recognitions, rather solely about them. Conceptualization functions as an indispensable blueprint in the work of this nature and materializes only through actualization. Materialization means that we weave these methods into our each and every moment, into our most mundane activities, into our relationships with others and ourselves. We must implement them into the mental and emotional world as much as we do into our actions. This is a nose to nose audio production. The Magic of Everyday Life by Maria Zepes, translated by Amy Moodley. Chapter 2: The Two Currents of Life. Conscious awareness is part of every person who must Conscious awareness is part of every person, but most often it is squandered on false objectives. Its value is diminished by ego worship, self-aggrandizement, and the futile desire that through the fortuitous coincidence of circumstances, our fate will suddenly improve. Whereas neither power, nor well-being, nor even knowledge, understanding, or wisdom are unmerited endowments of life. There is no external or internal achievement that was not preceded by tremendous investment of energy. The quote-unquote successful person's achievement is contingent on their abilities, conduct, and the purity of their endeavors in this direction. The quote-unquote popular person instinctively and precisely fulfills all the requirements for such accomplishments. Similarly, a person yearning for inner glory focuses their energy on establishing achievements in this domain. Desire for such honor being, of course, of the highest order and the most difficult objective to aim. Desire for such honor being, of course, of the highest order, the most difficult objective to attain. It encompasses successful solution to all the tasks the world places before us, establishing a great balance which is neutral in all directions without being passive or infertile. But more on that later. These two currents coursing through life, one is negative, passive, and unsuccessful, the other positive, active, and successful. Whenever we speak of success or the lack of it, we are not simply referring to the outside recognition or failure, but rather to the conduct that results in or fails to reach the ideal towards which we strive. Those who capitulate the cowardly servile souls protecting their monumental those who capitulate the cowardly servile souls protecting their momentary chattel are all swept up in life's negative current. Magic individuals who create their own destiny and are masters of their fate draw from the strength of the positive current. Magic is what we are talking about, the tenet that the stars do not compel but incline, and the mysterious suggestion that the wise person is master of their stars. And and the mysterious suggestion that, quote, the wise person is master of their stars, unquote, derive meaning only in the light of magic, because determinism ends where magic begins. Determinism refers to the world of manifested causes. Magic acts on the invisible, it changes nature of causes and source of causes. Magic makes it possible for us to create, not only through the power of procreation, but with our mind, to invoke into existence from the world of ideas, to mold life which will take form and become a physical reality. Furthermore, decisively transform our destiny. The same ability, depending on the direction in which it casts, binds or loosens. It either weaves itself into manifestations or withdraws from it. The same ability, depending on the direction in which it is cast, binds or loosens. It either weaves itself into manifestation or withdraws from it. The star's tyrannical fingers can point us into a corner like someone frightened stammering extra on a set only for the tyrannical fingers can point star's tyrannical fingers can point us into a corner like some frightened stammering extra on a set only for as long as we believe that life has supporting actors, that there is a situation, physical obstruction, or encumbrance that can prevent us from creating our life's work, provided we wish to bring such work into existence. Everyone can produce something in some form. Everyone can be a center of light, warmth, a life saving and revitalizing circle of power from which others draw, and whose light, by virtue of the law of reflection, they multiply. Those who emanate light, warmth, the atmosphere around them, and the radiance of the light of another often glows incandescent from unexpected and amazing inspirations. Humanity, for the most part, is none other than tree rooted into the ground. We tolerate climate and environment, and that our workplace stamp the identity upon us, not only the color of our skin, eyes, and hair, but also the way of thinking and the life pattern falls under this influence. Every flutter becomes dependent on it, and we are at its mercy. Undoubtedly, no one can extricate themselves entirely from under such influence. However, humanity can rise above it. Humanity, for the most part, is none other than a tree rooted in the ground. We tolerate climate and environment, and that our workplace stamp is and our workplace stamp is identity upon us. Not only the color of our skin, eyes, and hair, but also our way of thinking, life pattern fall, but also our way of thinking and life pattern fall under this influence. Every flutter becomes every flutter becomes dependent on it, and we are at its mercy. Undoubtedly, no one can extricate themselves entirely from under such influence. However, humanity can rise above it. A tree cannot change its environment. It has to remain where its roots have embedded it. A person, however, if their environment is oppressive, unproductive, or thwarts development, can step out of it. We can change our environment, but in order to take the step, we must know precisely the laws governing our fate and individuality. Once our intellect has discovered our ideal, this ideal, which has become the purpose of our life, draws us like a magnet towards itself. We move towards it, foreshorten space and compress time, because contact with it draws to itself our imaginative magical energies. This means that the power we use to build obstruction slowly retracts and pours into other channels. In coming chapters, we shall detail those methods that can attain results in whatever area of life we desire. For those who seem unable to apply them due to inner causes or insurmountable psychological problems, practical advice shall be given on how to overcome weaknesses that stand in the way of personal development. This is a nose to nose audio production. The Magic of Everyday Life by Maria Zeppes, translated by Amy Modley. Chapter 3: The Reciprocal Effects of Outer and Inner Behavior. The psychogenesis of a productive life is always twofold in nature. It is delineated into an inner and outer realm. Subsequently, the method to follow places equal weight on inner reality and external behavior. It considers the will, concentrative ability, imagination, familiarity with character types, self analysis, and a talent for deciphering symbols as important in adhering to certain norms of external conduct. Because our words and movements are all involuntary rituals which initiate powers that invoke various effects from our environment and ultimately reverberate back to us. Let us compare two people to each other, one playing a so-called leading role in life, someone creative with momentum, successful and popular in activities, and the other who walks in the shadows, tortured by lack of confidence, a typically misfortunate character. We can see the deeply ingrained visible differences between them in their constitution and general behavior. The quote-unquote unlucky person laments constantly, complains, and talks about past injuries. Their offendedness is possibly so deep that they keep its contents bottled, suffocating within, yet completely fill to the brim the channels of their thoughts with it. Their facial expression, posture, and every pore exudes this atmosphere. When this person tells a story, they pepper their performance with pessimistic remarks and speak regularly in the conditional mode where, where determination and momentum is required. Quote, if possibly, I believe to, the extent possible, then perhaps, although I'm not certain, let's wait, I don't know, maybe, are their favorite expressions. The quote unquote lucky person is cheerful and decisive. They never complain, never lament, even if a blow from fate occurs. They do not infringe on their environment as being at fault with the recitation of their troubles because they know instinctively that there is nothing constructive in doing so. If they discuss a problem with someone, they choose a person for this purpose who has the prerequisite to be able to help, because solidarity is the basis of human coexistence. No one can remain completely locked within themselves. At certain moments in life, we absolutely need to communicate and receive inspiration we can only get from someone complementary to ourselves. We should desire this service only from those who can provide it. Complaints, despondency that is cast on every manifestation of life, or incantations of injuries make us like a beggar who sidles up to the buttoned up people rushing by and tries to gather the daily necessities from life from impatiently tossed alms. Similarly, the beggar with twisted limbs, face distorted by pain, mutely dragging along in the street corner, does not garner more than miserable petty coins, which at most cover daily subsistence, but nothing in the least to change their status or condition. This conduct never elicits any determinant act from anyone outside that would elevate the beggar to an exceptional position. Therefore, attitude is destiny itself, the ritual with which we invoke the form of life we determine to make our own. The quote unquote lucky person speaks in affirmative mood. They set goals that are attainable provided they make the necessary effort to reach them, and they know that they have done so. This person's confidence is not irrational optimism, but conviction that making ideals into reality depends to the largest extent on themselves. The quote unquote unlucky person lives with all manner of postponing techniques. They like to wait and find out what others do before doing anything themselves. When it finally comes to taking action, they are cumbersome, squandering time and energy quibbling over details and on anxious thoughts. They're always late to arrive early. The quote unquote lucky person never postpones anything. They take care of matters as soon as they arise. No waiting for others' example to act. They do not waste time puttering over details when working, but do things in broad strokes, always magically finding appropriate assistance to take care of the details. They are punctual by nature, arrive in good time, choosing occasions with surprising sensitivity. Their company is sought after, their paths are made smooth, their simple atmosphere, ability to take action evokes supporters. They always give radiating positive energy and are magnetic, absorbing, and convincing. Therefore, they receive friendship, attention, and goodwill. The characterizations of these types is, of course, not so rigid. Between these two polarities, an enormous variation in scale lies hidden. We should also keep in mind that the quote unquote lucky and quote unquote successful person is often not at all happy and mostly inharmonious. For this reason, we always use these concepts in their higher meaning. Merely a pretender, someone jockeying for position and serving personal selfish interests with every gesture, who is entirely cold, merciless, and greed inside, may experience temporarily outward success amidst inner turmoil, irritation, and anxiety. For such a character, external downfall is just as certain as their psychological breakdown. Quote unquote success is when we convince ourselves as well. In doing, we elevate and shed light on ourselves while striving towards the constructive goal. Quote unquote luck or good fortune is when, in the midst of some fabulous creative act of service, we are able to give to others. That person becomes not only a conduit, but a pool filled with capacity, with healing and regenerating powers. There is no greater career, nor more eternal wealth. To the question whether someone can become a positive person in this context, who until now has either in part or totally been a victim of negative direction, the answer is yes, by practicing the magic of everyday life. This is a nose to nose audio production. The Magic of Everyday Life by Maria Zepes, translated by Amy Modley. Chapter 4: The Possibility of Intrinsic Change. Fortunately for the luckless sap, the one dominated by the stars, there is nothing as certain in the world as change. Our bodies change, as do our circumstances, as do the times. Not a single cell remains the same in our body as it was 7 years ago. However, we can direct the process of change to take place in a channel of our own choosing. If we allow the direction of our development to proceed negligently, pummeled by the pulverizing coercion of circumstance, the change takes place at a pace similar to that of water hewing fissures in a rock. However, if we guide our beings with firm hand, what seemed impossible at first suddenly becomes possible. Conceptual arteries within our rigid, sluggish psyche actually unclog. There is nothing unnatural about this process, and circumstances would often take the same course as ourselves if we would but recognize their true nature. This fact is evidenced in intelligent people in whom the power of various talents and endowments is contained. They do not necessarily have to wait for the help from outside. They can reach out and manifest the change themselves, can advance towards it, and accelerate its course to an enormous extent. This is a nose to nose audio production. The Magic of Everyday Life by Maria Zepes, translated by Amy Modley. Chapter 5: The Effect Thinking Has on the Circumstances of Our Lives. If we examine the coil from which our actions spring, the origins of our conflicts, hang-ups, external and internal complications, and stormy neurological life, we come upon the tyrannical power of demonic elements in every instance. These demons often lead us into barely endurable inner crises, despite our genuinely higher intentions and better judgment. In-depth psychology makes these demons visible before our intellect and elevates them to consciousness. It explores and finds out their names and betrays their most fiercely guarded secrets, held with ferocious, extended claws, namely, that their vulnerability is caused by their own dependency. The essence of their existence is no more than yearning and passion. It is we who give this boundless, voracious hunger tools the form. They embrace with human arms, strike, kill, maul with human hands. They taste the extreme flavors of carnal pleasure, torture, and suicidal fear through human senses and the nervous system. To the extent that we submit to their influence, the fundamental nature of this tyrannical demonic anarchy reigns supreme over us. To the extent our mental control slackens, and that of the body's natural quest for equilibrium, a plethora of diseases take hold of our physical being, from organic problems to nervous anxiety and finally nervous breakdown. Now let us look at the process in the reverse. How does the demon gradually gain power over us? In what manner do we transfer increasingly more ground to it? How do we allow it to sneak into our inner sanctum of our mind, where it paralyzes and dethrones our ego, establishing thereby the destructive dictatorship of chaos, emotional urges, and passions? First and foremost, we must understand that the demon, whom every action is a subterfuge, is invisible. It does not take its objective suddenly by storm, but step by step through cold-blooded cunning of instinct. The center of our organism is the brain. Every life function originates in the brain and is the terminal point for each impression. Higher impulses behind the visible organism also enter the body through this precise transmitting station. as do deeply negative forces in search of self-actualization. Neither can they circumvent the brain. The will, which strives for control, must first influence our thinking. The substance of thought, the mental atmosphere that pervades the brain, is the abstract essence that, together with the unconscious operative commands, diffuses and disperses in our body and determines our entire conduct. A change of direction towards the negative can represent catastrophe not only in our psychological being but also in our physical body. If an impulse intrudes upon the center of our consciousness, implants itself there, and creates a particular atmosphere, demonic elements that have been lurking in the twilight can readily materialize in that organism. These demons have come in possession of our civil rights, doing so through legal means. Their function, therefore, is twofold. Through various subjective emotional influences, they change an impulse or simply intensify negative impressions coming from external world and mold them into nameless passions and anxiety, afterwards executing the destructive intention sired into thought. Let us take, for example, a person who, as a result of being in a disharmony with the world and themselves, transposes every impression they perceive into a sentence of dark and bitter misfortune. They find curious recompense in dressing injuries and their opinions into the most irate, caustic concepts. Laden with their evil, depressing, demoralizing contents, these ideas froth and steam, exuding an atmosphere simply to that of a morgue. They implant themselves in the brain, from where all primary motor and sensory neurological circuits and channels stem. What happens as a result? The entire psychological and physical organism begins gradually to conform to the command, the idea of misfortune. Such person's conduct, behavior, internal and external atmosphere is such that bad moods and depression become permanent. Circumstances, as if by magic, begin to accumulate proof that the world view as pessimist was correct. This, however, is still not all. Digestive problems, possibly diabetes, appear. The ponderousness of the problems further debilitate and embitter the individual. They lose weight, have trouble sleeping, and are dead tired. They have lost interest in work, have no idea, they have no ideas, are irritable, their posture sunken and stooped. As a result of a superstitious, as a result of stooped, surreptitious, defensive posture, breathing is impaired and the body's oxygen balance becomes inadequate. Insufficient oxygen leads to actual anemia, which causes the entire avalanche of chronic illnesses. In addition, all their friends abandon them. Everyone has lost patience. They dismiss their complaints and are evidently bored by them. Their job also becomes at risk. They feud with their family and are abandoned. In the midst of this pitiless, selfish, vile world at the mercy of the physical and spiritual adversities, unquote. Behold this illustration. What outraged protests would we elicit were we to point out at this stage that the victims themselves set into motion the body's decline and deterioration, the vicissitudes of fate, that they projected every flicker of this melodrama from within. They articulated their own sentencing and passed it on to the organs of execution, the instincts, passions, and subjective chaotic emotional world of their demons. All events that followed were a consequence of this progression. The lack of enthusiasm bred apathy towards them in return. Lack of trust led to mistrust, which affected self-confidence and poisoned it. They became clumsy and awkward, perceiving every approaching movement as an attack, a put down to be diverted by provoking first. Biting sparks scatter in all directions from their restless, malcontent nervous system, stretched beyond the limit of their currents of anxiety. Seeing their environment retreat and flee in the face of the situation, it is they, however, who feel scorned and persecuted. Piling mistakes upon mistakes, they make spastic, ill-timed, panicky efforts to force victory over actions and reactions that stem from themselves. They assume various postures, brag, fall into ridiculous extremes or lamentations, blackmail people with passionate outbursts by which they are viewed as a passing lunatic, shadowboxing with whimsical phantoms. Even pitying well wishers who try to understand the situation are shaken in their confidence. We could go on endlessly analyzing the chain reaction that originates from a single fatal mental exposition which, dispersed in all directions, can pulverize a person's physical and spiritual strength. In the seed of the above example, in which it is virtually impossible to unravel the complications that led to complete disaster, there were merely a few thoughts that became habitual and with magical power entrenched themselves to glow into a dark formula which acted as the agent of disease far more murderous than any plague carrying bacteria. Of course, we deliberately drew the example with such sharp lines and drastic colors to focus consciously on the dangers of loosely rampant, irresponsible mental patterns. We must ultimately understand in its full magnitude that everything that takes form is conceived in thought. Thought is sire to our illnesses, failures, and misfortunes. Healthy, constructive, harmonious thoughts create equilibrium in our body the same way they do in our circumstances. This is a nose to nose audio production. The Miracle of Everyday Life by Maria Zeppes, translated by Amy Modley. Chapter 6: The Healing Power of Thought. The tensions fomenting behind thoughts, inspiring them, and determining the form the body and psyche take, only seemingly carry these demonic impulses and the reciprocal effects of thought stemming from them into a vicious circle, without beginning or end. In reality, this compulsive interaction lasts only for as long as we allow initiative and control to remain in the domain of demonic elements, and only for as long as we allow dubiously rooted subjective values and judgments to proliferate in our brain like weeds without system or control, sweeping us in a direction towards which they are pulled by a magnetic attraction of depth. The moment we replace destructive formulas and crystal clear thoughts that serve our true psychological and moral interests, such that they block the effects of negative thoughts, fundamental change takes root in every tendency of our lives. Even if we were born with tendencies that paralyze us, provided we have something in our organism still left intact. It is difficult to find the thoughts that dissolve and heal this condition because the parts of the personality that have been under siege by the demonic infection defend against every attempt to be placed in light. Even the most intelligent beings appear to misunderstand this point. No precise enough definition of the diagnosis appears to exist that can link an individual's consciousness with the true nature of the processes taking place within. The antidote must therefore be manufactured by each of us through inner recognition. Any psychoanalyst or doctor of the soul can cite interesting facts about this dilemma. It is obvious, of course, that the short circuit The antidote must therefore be manufactured by each of us through inner recognition. Any psychoanalyst or doctor of the soul can cite interesting facts about this dilemma. It is obvious, of course, that this short circuit, the deluge of weepy prostrations, alarmed retreat into seclusion, offended counterattacks, and self-deluded cover-up explanations, is brought about by an instinctual defense mechanism that wants to neutralize the medicine that threatens its existence. In the meantime, until we discover through accumulated experience, helpful friends, and finally our own self analysis, our own individual mental antidote for every disease cluster, there are certain general laws of inner and outer behavior that must no longer ignore. These are as much principles for a healthy spirit as basic hygiene practices are for the body. I will summarize these laws in the following 4 points. Number 1. A negative person exuding unfriendly vibrations is enclosed in an invisible repellent spiral. Number 2. A complainer exhausts even the Number 2. A complainer exhausts even the best intentions, complaining vampirizes or sucks and depletes the energy, therefore others instinctually close themselves off from it. Number two, a complainer exhausts even the best intentions. Complaining vampirizes or sucks the energy or depletes the energy, therefore others instinctually close themselves off from it. Number three, fear and bitterness create disease and invoke misfortune. Number four, a dissatisfied, impatient person who talks abrasively about injuries, pains, and negative situations in constantly repetitive, suggestive fits of rage make their own conditions unbearable and sooner or later bring fatal problems upon themselves. For these reasons, let us never be unfriendly towards others, not even in thought. Let us not complain. Let us not allow ourselves to be swept up by bitterness and fear. Let us avoid evil, abrasive, discontented thoughts and statements. Negative tendencies that have already been implanted or are so inclined can be retuned in the following way. Do not give depressive impulses a thought form in the way that their poisonous content would require, but allow them to surface diluted with its antitoxin. Do not stifle them. Do not stuff their dangerous complexes back into the unconscious zones where they can infect and ferment further. Rather, release their pent up malignant steam in the light of understanding. As an example, someone is afraid of the day approaching when they will have to stand their ground under difficult circumstances. This date may be an examination or an introduction that can decide one's fate, a court trial, a public appearance, etc. A negative person at this time allows full sway to distinguishing. A negative person at this time allows full sway to disintegrating thoughts. They reenact various obstacles and exciting potentials for danger countless times. In the process, their imagination transformed them into an executioner, a veritable animated author of grand guignol, placing their own unfortunate phantom figure at the center of the most unbearable, humiliating, and excruciating scenarios. The individual veritably pulverizes their own self confidence. By the appointed hour, when they could act spontaneously as the moment demands, in command of exceptional abilities, they have become a hurried, flustered, quaking, clumsy, nervous wreck whose memory lapses and reflexes turn against them. They blush, stammer, perspire. Their statements are hostile, alarming, unrelated. Their entire being manifests failure. A positive individual thoroughly thinks through what needs to be done, the factors that are dependent on them in a given situation, and then they isolate themselves. They release any debilitating repetitive thoughts, considering it sufficient to concentrate only on the necessary actions to take at the appropriate time. Until that moment, there is no work to be done. Pondering what will happen should they fail is none of their business. This does not even come up for consideration. They look forward to events transpiring favorably with bright confidence and prepare accordingly. If something were to not turn out well, they can work through its consequences when faced with the reality. Completion gives power to endure the facts. There is no way to add or subtract from future events with an unknown outcome if in our imaginations we live through it 100 times, coercing and struggling through possible tangible variations. Knowing that prohibition against debilitating vampirizing thoughts can only be successful if they place something else with powerful and vibrant content at their focus of their interest, they divert their attention from the subject of their concern. The sphere of thoughts into which someone at such time engages is totally individual. It is essential that it have unique drawing power for the person. Whether diversion is a book, someone's arresting company, passionate work, an activity that requires great concentration, or some form of entertainment is always determined by the range of interests and possibilities at hand. Another example. We're convinced that our discontented, unfriendly inner space is the result of certain external conditions and relationships. We believe we are victims of unfortunate circumstances and malevolent people. We are suffering unfairly. We watch the development of events and boundless selfishness, lack of sympathy, and unpleasantness of people who seemingly take masochistic relish in our problems. Drowning in waves of apathy, we track the thread of our plague with our own internal commentary, which is in a neon spotlight glow transcendent, in, which is in a neon spotlight glows incandescent, becoming the governing ideas of every motif in our lives. Its fluid tops its fluid tops the basin of our thoughts. Our concepts photos our concepts phosphorus is as toxic fleshy swamp flora, exuding penetrating disintegrating emanations that begin to dominate our entire organism, psychological life and moods. This foul, evil inner environment is nutrient for our reflexes. We respond to every external move or gesture towards us with suspicion and sharp skeptical, diversionary, or offensive action, again determining in a negative context our further interaction with the world. Let us now look for a way out of this rather chronically diseased condition. Before anything else, we must change our basic attitude. We need to recognize our own inner conduct as the cause of the injuries we suffer, not external appearances. We posit our equation at the core of our worldview by way of life's most occult and deepest laws. That external circumstances are always secondary. The reaction of our intellect and character to transpiring events determines good or bad fate. Realignment of the two immediately and decisively changes the internal conditions of power. Virtual avalanches and unusual leveling takes place. Enormous pressures are released. Why? Because by changing our attitude, our commentary on events must of nece- because by changing our attitude, our commentary on events must be of necessity also creating change inside the body. The basin of our thoughts becomes filled with different content. And here is where we return to the axiom that it's possible to realign negative tendencies if we allow them to surface diluted with antitoxins. Even if this new perspective, we cannot deny the seemingly trying nature of experience bombarding our way. Life undoubtedly is not an uninterrupted fun holiday, but for almost everyone, it is a struggle, a complicated achievement, a work that requires total preparation and concentration. We do not absolve ourselves from responsibility in this dynamic process. Our definitions palpate not around the projection, but around the cluster causing the projection. All at once we feel we cannot rebuke some threatening obscene gesture by mirror image or by frightening or be all at once we feel we cannot rebuke some threatening obscene gesture by a mirror image or be frightened by the jerky movements of shadows projected on a wall from a light source behind us that we cannot see. Consequently, our inner commentaries are verbalized something like this: people are envious, this is true, but I'm envious also. The envy is directed towards acquiring something exceptional, different from anything I possess. Some people are weighed down by the fact that someone else has something that makes them outstanding and that they are cast into a shadow beside it. What could this feeling be in its pure original form other than a yearning to possess the most beautiful, greatest, most valuable energies? When we begin to distill this caustic, vicious, dangerous material, it becomes rarer and even more fleeting. It floats upwards and expands into the higher regions. It encompasses dimensions in the momentum of its yearning and finally rises completely above the heavy clawed layers impregnating with death. Because envy is also bound by the spirit's overall comprehensive ability and its direction is tailored by the objective deemed so valuable, and the value judgment truly goes through an enormous transformation in the distillation process. One by one, it casts off those ideas that, under a new, increasingly broader perspective, dwindle, fade, or are exposed for the empty, impermanent substitute tools they are. At this stage, the intellect, awakening to consciousness, becomes suddenly aware of unexpected turns in an unusual mystery play. One has to register that while consumed by envy for dense, gaudy, superficial things, one takes on the symbolism of the appearance of what is sought after and coveted. Imitating the symptoms, the person becomes a gaudy, superficial, dense figure who then gets in the way of yet another fellow human being's base envy. Envy clashes with envy. As soon as ideals change, however, and envy is distilled towards higher goals, the clashes cease to exist. The awakened person has left the thick denseness, the dark crowdedness. They have become invisible to the go-getters because they were divested of the opportunist's conjuring formula, which provoked the inferiority of the hustlers from their own base layers. They have therefore found the antidote to envy without having to force themselves into response or torture themselves or their fellow human beings. The formula for the serum, envy must be transponded to a higher frequency with the help of spiritual goals of enduring value. Few people envy this, even few imitate it. However, whoever executes this operation on themselves exchanges fate. Even if our physical being does not change, the name of things change with them. Even if our physical beings do not change, the name of things change within. Whether they handled as envy before is suddenly transformed as a result of easing the acute pain of fever into power glowing with inspiration that grows wings to development. Both the toxin and the antitoxin for lack of sympathy, selfishness, suspicion, and unpleasantness lie within us. The medicine for every lower scale harmful potential is the recognition that we are not the ones who has to excrete. The medicine for every lower scale harmful potential is the recognition that we are the one who has to extricate ourselves from conflicts we have caused upward. Only we are capable of putting an end to provocations, responding to base tendencies, temperamental emanations, gestures, and words with the power of thought. We must place different constructive thoughts at our projection center in our own mind, and we must stand by them even if diffuse. Negatively charged powers continue to rattle and swirl the air around us for a long time. The destructive effects of self tickling, self enraging, self diseasing, or disparaging suggestions is known to all of us. Even as unpleasant Even an unpleasant toothache in the middle of the night can be boiled to a small scale cataclysm for ourselves and our environment if we allow flagellating words such as these enter into our minds. I can't stand it. I'm going insane. It must stop at once or I'll jump out of my skin. Ooh, 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 that hurts. I can't stand it. I can't stand it. I can't stand it any longer. The next phase of the inner conflict is even louder whimpering, heaving sobs, heart wrenching gasps for air, screams, the scurrying of the entire household. The antitoxin formula for the same situation is, quote unquote, unfortunately my tooth hurts. I have no painkillers. I would not like to disturb anyone sleeping. If I observe it objectively, I have to conclude that I feel more of a throbbing, which is uncomfortable, but under no circumstances unendurable. If I lie here awake without doing anything, my thoughts will continually feel around the inflamed area. I must divert them from there actively. The person in pain has many ways to redirect their thoughts based on individual preference. One may be to turn the light and start reading an exciting book. One may be to turn on a light and start reading an exciting book. Another is something much more valuable and productive. This person engages hidden powerful frequencies into their thought current circuitry. Humanity's sacrificial, willing desire to suffer, heroism, which exalts as a result of pain, rises above pain. In order to do this, they may remain calmly in bed in the dark, while their mind becomes a source of a far reaching string of thoughts. I lie awake, together with many other hundreds of thousands of sick people with fevers, who are injured, moreover sadistically tortured, who suffer horrible pain without sedation. They thirst, racked with spasms, wounds are rotting in them. I offer this little toothache to one of them so that their pain may be lessened. I accept a small portion of their suffering. It makes me happy to be able to share their burden. This latter conduct is of course only productive in the individual whose ideals already shine in the highest order of the ethos. The principle of this method is to neutralize powerful emotions and tyrannical thoughts with far more powerful effects. Powerful desire or a passive wish for our disposition to improve does not bring results by itself. The art of retuning unpleasant complexes is based on that we slide our emotions through frequencies elevation to a higher plane. It goes without saying that in cases where the cause of depression, no one can expect to be free from ingrained negative habits of 20, 30 years in just 2 days. Filling channels that flow in improper directions comes with much self denial, and it also takes time for thought currents to cut new, healthier channels for themselves. In any case, this magical exchange of tendencies brought about by thoughts produces surprising changes in especially chronic cases. It is important, however, that every time feelings of dejection rise to the surface, we posit them with strong counter instinctive feelings. We cannot permit embittered despair to lord over us even once. Our ultimate goal is to have our thinking become an electric circuit board whose knobs are directed by our will. Thoughts determine circumstances. A close relationship exists between one's intellectual activity and physical function with an idea. In this regard, fulfilling the function of impregnator and based on the automatic magnetism regulating circumstances. Whoever wishes to be lord of their fate, depression or demonic shackles must have mastery over their thoughts. They must change the entire mechanism of their intellect, banishing fear and despondency forever. A constructive, positive person knows that through various struggles and obstacles, they are progressing towards a goal of self redemption. Endurance and willpower help us on, recognition and intuition direct us. Let us be careful, therefore, about the words that resonate in our minds. To think is to practice magic. This is a nose to nose audio production. The Magic of Everyday Life by Maria Zepes, translated by Amy Modley. Chapter 7: How to Attain that Our Environment Adapts to Us. The world is built upon mutual reciprocity. If, if we wish to receive, first we must give. This truth was expressed by Lao Tzu in his letter to the emperor in the following way: where man wishes to reap, he must first sow, and where he has reaped, he must sow again. This same principle is in effect in every human interaction. If we wish to acquire friends, we must first become a good friend. If we wish to be loved, we must first love. In order to expect favors, sacrifices, help, or goodwill, we have to first develop these virtues within and put them into action. If we want to inspire trust, we have to learn to give trust, even if mistrust is the character flaw and the downfall of the person whom we bequeath our trust. Often, this is the outstretched hand that helps an individual drowning in the swamp of self depreciation and character weakness to reach solid ground and acquire new self confidence. We are not talking about gullibility clouding the facts before us, but about offering the healing salve of trust and respect to someone suffering precisely from the lack of it. After the foregoing passages, it is obvious that our environment will only adapt to us if we adapt to it first. People like accommodating individuals. They endeavor to please those they like, whose sensitivity, attentiveness, and sympathy reverberate echoes of these self-same virtues and multiply them over. Whereas in facing an enemy, everyone closes up and becomes defensive, before a considerate and understanding friend, a person will let go of their barricades step by step and allow passages into the innermost matters. Whereas facing an enemy, everyone closes up and becomes defensive, before a considerate and understanding friend, a person will let go of their barricades step by step and allow passage into their innermost matters. Even the most self assured person longs to share burdens, receive advice, and impetus from someone stronger or less biased in areas where they feel weak. In this refined circulation of mutual accommodation and support, no one is carrying out commands and no one is giving orders. Nevertheless, cooperation unfolds in our environment in response to our benevolence, accommodating us in the way we wish, and does so voluntarily and with pleasure. Proof of this equation is validated through the consequences of what we call negative conduct. For example, when a customer is impatient, argumentative, demanding, even threatening, the attention will instinctively and consciously do everything to retaliate the insult. The customer will receive worse service, inferior goods, and deliberate delays. In the end, damage sustained and the loss of time is far greater than the person had waited patiently. In the same instance, someone patient, friendly, and considerate receives full service benefits and is treated like an ally because they simply expressed understanding through some small sign, gesture, or smile. The art of accommodation is by all means based on the knowledge of character types. We cannot bombard an introverted, thorny, bitter, mistrustful person whose self esteem has been damaged with excessive cloying behavior or aggressive favors and thoughts. They would go into even deeper paroxysms, their reflexes reacting in the same raw form as before. However, everyone has their own formula, their soft spot, the touch which causes them to open. Finding this spot requires knowledge of character and intuition. Asking the question, how can we get our environment to adapt to us, would imply that we are promising our self interest we are promoting our self interest through the use of various crafty means. Since we do not want our intention to cast such a shadow, our objectives must be precisely defined. Above all, it must be known that our methods, and especially our intent in this area, have as much to do with serving our material advantage as does a useful edible plant toxic counterpart, which may resemble it on the outside but is the essence its opposite. This quintessential difference is represented first by the goal itself, then the ideals that extend behind that method. We know that magic, which means strength, is either white or black according to its direction. It is density of matter or sublimating power. The direction that concerns us points towards dissolution freedom. Through understanding the magic of everyday life, we are guided to the most useful methods that loose the ties caused by improper habits and wrongly ingrained mental conduct, thereby furthering our development. Someone increasingly open who can reconnect to positive abilities, once again reclaiming strength of character, is by nature a more successful in the external material world than under the yoke of inhibitions and depression. This success is merely an accompaniment or an accompanying symptom of the mental effort invested. How we respond determines whether we live up to the task or fail in the incessant battle to make our ideals a reality. Success, in and of itself, vampirizes, making us gullible and inclining us to invest our energies in illusions, for which time never grants abiding guarantees. What we are striving for is sustained inner collateral, inner transformation. In comparison to this goal, success is proverbial piece of tattering rag. The only relationship we can have to it is expressed by the adept. Quote, it is not wrong to accept what the world has to offer you, but it is dangerous to give yourself to the world for, for, for it without reservation. The only freedom is equilibrium in the success and adversity alike. Everything else is extremist abundance, rate, exertion, vested interest, dependency, and subjugation. In working to attain that our environment adapt to us, we are in fact directing a mystery play, a play in which our own actual and at the same time symbolic and magical sequence of actions inspires, elucidates, and convinces participants to go along with us. Because people listen to, trust, accept, and follow as an example whomever accommodates them. A person who radiates light, a leader by the way of suggestive behavior, is always a magician, always planting seeds, ideas, fecundating, influencing the fates of those who are weaker, yearning to be led, dependent, they bind and dissolve. As a result of such magical conduct, true respect develops, which those secretly tortured by depreciated emotional values struggle to achieve through embittered and hopeless means. One who serves their environment sincerely, willing to take on hardships, tuning into and allowing for weakness without having to make any effort, becomes esteemed. They set a standard. The words have a creative and decisive influence, therefore, they are magical. This is precisely the reason their responsibilities augment as well. The opinions they form, the lines of character they draw become a verdict, a suggestion that debilitated individuals follow blindly. The character analyst, who is not also a physician touched by the transcendence of the spirit, is always a charlatan and black magician, even unknowingly. Because character analysis, according to higher laws, can only be legitimate and constructive if the diagnosis is administered with healing, sedating panacea that vitalize immortal hope in the individual. A cold, raw, demoralizing character reading is an amputation without anesthesia, after which the patient may bleed to death. Let us be careful then with character analysis when our increasing recognition causes a multitude of advice seekers to appear before us. We must not relate even the obviously blatant negative, unpleasant things in a way that may cause shock, create a short circuit, or take root improperly. No matter how much people provoke us, we should never speak harshly about them, their circumstances, or their relatives in the same way that we would not teach them to open a wound with rough hands. Of course, we must not lie, nor is this necessary. Gently phrased, accompanied by an antitoxin, the most delicate matters can be expressed tolerably. Our environment's adaptability to us is therefore an enormous stimulus for our development. It spurs us into external and internal activity and conduct that is exemplary to others, self-developing and educational in effort in effect for our lives. For this reason, it is a good aim for which we strive. This is a nose to nose audio production. The Magic of Everyday Life by Maria Zepes, translated by Amy Modley. Chapter 8: The Proper Use of Willpower. Many people confuse willpower with stubbornness and coerciveness, determination with obstinacy. These symptoms rather indicate the sluggishness of willpower, a gripping illness, and potency aberration. A healthy current of willpower is infinitely elastic. Its controlled power is demonstrated when it approaches its goal not only with perseverance, but if circumstances warrant, with leniency. Natural willpower is energy governed by the intellect, the implementing tool of an idea. If the intellect behind the will is murky or demonic, negative symptoms are the result. The will represents an energy output towards some objective. The method with which we enforce our will does not belong to the process of force. This is the personality at the helm, the perceiving and directing sensibility. Obviously, it is not lucidity that is operating behind the furious willfulness of the individual who butts their head against the wall, but irresponsible passion. Such behavior rarely results in achieving anything intended, while the seemingly permissive elastic will, through self-regulation, inevitably teaches the goal it set out to accomplish. Patience, perseverance, the ability to wait firmly for things to take their course is a sign of a strong, healthy will. Most grand versions, most grand visions can only be realized through steadfast, patient work. A chattering, boastful individual who leaps into things impetuously squanders energy immediately at the start, energy that would have been necessary in order to reach the goal. Silence accumulates strength. For this reason, if circumstances warrant, be quiet and wait. Willpower suspended in silence, behind which knowledge and daring without fear keep vigil ripens the time to act. If we can call into being this attitude in some area of our quest, we shall discover to our amazement that this patient, controlled, tenacious inner incandescence will begin to attract the objects of your desire, and without our performing any visible gestures towards it, the goal begins to come towards us.